Kraven the Hunter has finally dropped in theaters, so let me just jump right into a review here because Kraven is one of the worst films I've seen this year. It is a whimpering and pathetic conclusion to Sony's little series of spin off movies that are dedicated to these Spider Man villains. This will probably be a minimally edited video because this film nearly broke me, to be honest. And if Sony doesn't respect the time of its audience members, I don't really feel the need to respect their latest release by giving too careful of an analysis here. Um, Kraven the Hunter is utterly sauceless in every conceivable way. Hi, I'm Sean. Welcome to the channel. Kraven is just devoid of any real sauce or momentum. Despite its R rating, the violence feels weightless and of little impact. The plot is very thin. The entire film has a lot of dead air in its dialogue sequences. All of the actors are pretty likable in other things, but they can't really save the dire script that they've been presented here. Aaron Taylor Johnson is someone who I typically really like. Kick Ass was a pretty formative movie for me growing up, and I think he's pretty good in Quicksilver in his singular MCU appearance. Um, he's capable too of turning in like genuinely awards worthy stuff when the situation calls for it. Like I think he's fantastic in Nocturnal Animals, for example. As the titular Kraven, however, he just feels totally lost. He feels like he's grasping at straws for something of substance to hold on to throughout the entire movie. Um, I'd like to highlight Christopher Abbott as the foreigner here. I really like Christopher Abbott. He's one of my guys, one of my favorite actors working today. I loved him in Girls. I loved him in Sanctuary. I loved him in Poor Things. Um, and his character here in Craven is one of the more interesting antagonists presented throughout the course of the film, but his storyline kind of concludes in a very predictable and deflated sort of final confrontation for him. That kind of left me feeling a little bit unsatisfied given how much he had been built up. Um, and I also should discuss Ariana DeBose, the female lead of the movie. She plays Calypso. I think I think Ariana DeBose comes out of this movie looking the worst out of anybody. Um, she's asked the most out of all of the performers and really is not given anything to work with. Um, I like her in other stuff. I think Ariana DeBose in general is pretty fantastic. Like I think her Oscar for West Side Story is well deserved. I think she's pretty good in Wish, despite the fact that I, understand and agree with some of the criticisms of that movie. Um, but between Argyle earlier in the year and now this Craven, Ariana DeBose has appeared in what I think are the two worst films of 2024, hands down. So she needs to fire the person on her team that keeps convincing her to take projects like this. I don't know what is happening over there at Ariana DeBose HQ, but it's not it. It's not happening. Um, DeBose and Johnson have this kind of failure throughout the movie to develop any sort of interesting chemistry. It's an R-rated film, and both of them are very attractive people, and one might think that that might lead to these two characters having some sort of romance, but the audience doesn't even really get that throughout the course of the proceedings. Like, there's a scene where Johnson fights off a leopard or like a snowcat or something like that, and I thought that that would lead to a kind of stereotypical action movie scene where DeBose tends to his wounds and then they hook up after divulging some sort of personal backstory to one another. But the movie isn't really even interested in giving us that. I'm not saying that there needs to be like crazy amounts of nudity in what is essentially a comic book movie, but people like to see two hot actors having some sort of romantic or sexual tension on screen, and this movie isn't even interested in delivering that in any kind of substantive way. That was really frustrating to me. Um, the movie kind of just avoids being interesting when it comes to any of its plot threads. Like, speaking of DeBose as Calypso again, like, they do this dance of like not fully revealing what her deal is throughout the course of the film and having DeBose allude to like this air of mystery about how she's got more going on than meets the eye, as if Sony, thinks that the character is beloved enough to warrant drawing out an origin story or setting up more of her as like an action hero in the future. And I just think it would have benefited them to just make Calypso. I'm not super familiar with her in the comics, but I'm pretty sure she's like a literal witch. So, like, in my view, I think Sony would have benefited from just like committing to the bit. And like, if you're going to have all of these comic book characters in your movie, just make her a witch in this movie and like go crazy with it and like have fun with it. But it's attempting to be way too grounded almost in a way when it comes to that character, and I just think that that did not really pay off well. Um, a similar place where I think that that's an issue in the film is the character of Chameleon. Spoilers, by the way. I guess if you're worried about getting this awful film spoiled for you, but Fred Hechinger, the guy, he was in Gladiator 2 earlier this year. He was good in that, but he plays the chameleon here, and his kind of origin story is a tad more coherent than DeBose's character, but not by much. There's a brief moment during the finale of the film where it looks like for a second that the movie might be doing something interesting. It might, make Chameleon the mastermind of the entire piece. It seemed for the briefest of moments that like they were going to do this thing where the Chameleon was actually the mastermind and manipulating Kraven, his own brother, this whole time to do his evil bidding. But of course, as that would have been slightly surprising and interesting, the movie does not do that. Refuses to do that because we have to be the most boring version of this movie imaginable at all times. We do get a little bit of chameleon-ing at the end of the film. It's this like tag at the end where Chameleon has now done this heel turn and become more villainized. And we get a showcase of his powers. And I like the Chameleon in the Spider-Man comic books. I am a big comic book fan, but I think the visualization here is just not there. It looks bad. It looks kind of ridiculous the way that he shapeshifts because um, the character himself in Kraven does not shapeshift his body, or at least can't yet. So it's like he can change his face into Aaron Taylor Johnson's face, but he's still like 5 feet tall compared to the actual Aaron Taylor Johnson. It just looked bad. It didn't look good at all. I just don't think that it translated on screen well in this particular iteration, which is a real shame. Russell Crowe is here. He's knocking around. He is the patriarch of the Kravinoff family. I don't really have a big take on his performance. To be honest, he's fine, but he has kind of one speed throughout the movie that he doesn't really deviate from. I am glad that he was present during the extended flashback that takes place at the beginning of the film because there's a flashback sequence that shows you how Craven becomes Craven, and it's really helped along by the fact that Crow has this like default level of gravitas. He is an Oscar winner and he's been in the industry. He's been an icon for, at least 20 years now. And gosh, this flashback sequence, it felt like it took up half of the gosh darn runtime. I was not a fan of how slowly it moved. And the only thing that was keeping me engaged during this extended flashback was Crow, and Crow being kind of Tool, being mean, being villainous, and even though he doesn't really change throughout the film in any significant way, he's certainly entertaining. I mean, Russell Crowe is not usually bad and stuff. You know what I mean? Um, I guess the other actor I should talk about is Alessandra Nivola. He strangely kind of ends up being a footnote for me. I really like this actor in things like, well, you know what? I think he's good in The Many Saints of Newark, despite problems that I have with that movie. I think he's phenomenal in The Art of Self Defense. That his performance in that film is probably one of my favorite of that entire year. Um, but his take on the Rhino, I mean, he is making some interesting choices when he is allowed some breathing room. But as the movie kind of chugs along, it feels like he gets lost in the mix, if I'm being honest. And, maybe I'm in the minority there, but I just think of the things in the movie that I find memorable. The Rhino just really isn't one of them. I think the Rhino is a cool Spider Man villain in general, but this iteration of the character just didn't feel all that compelling. Maybe they just didn't pay him enough attention throughout the course of the movie. Um, and it also, maybe it's because the final transformation when he goes full Rhino just still doesn't quite look all that great. Like, it looks okay, but not only does his final form look a little subpar compared to what I had built up in my head, but also the finale feels kind of deflated pretty quickly because Kraven finds like this big, it's metaphorically, I would describe it as the Rhino has a big arrow pointing to his one weakness, like just stab here. It's like a video game boss fight. It's not really any meaningful win. Um, it felt exactly like hit this button to win the game, and Craven does it, and then we all go home. Um, I don't know. I imagine that much of this movie was retooled and cut up and put back together, given how many times it was delayed. But that's not an excuse to release a movie that's this bad. Like, I'm glad they kept the, in my opinion, very likable Tom Holland version of Peter Parker out of this whole Sony extended universe business. I mean, for the most part, he's kept out of it. Um, and I'm also glad that, I'm glad that because all of these movies were so bad that the actual literal connections to Spider-Man were so few. Like, in this film, Miles Warren gets a shout out, the Jackal, but we've never seen a version of the Jackal in any of these movies before, so that's made for this movie alone. It's not a reference to any sort of extended MCU thing. And then there's like a Daily Bugle headline, I think, on a laptop at some point. That's about all of these Spider-Man connections we get. There's also like a literal vision of spiders at some point that you're supposed to go and point at in the theater and be thankful for that breadcrumb, I guess. I mean, I'm actually of the opinion that they should have, and I'm glad that they did, kept the, in my opinion, pretty quality overall MCU Spider-Man away from all of this awful, awful extended bullshit, frankly. I don't think anyone should go see this movie. I had more fun, frankly, seeing Morbius, even though that final post-credit scene really sours me on that movie because I hate what they do with the Vulture. But I think overall, Morbius is a better time. I had a lot more fun with Madam Web, if I'm being honest. I think Madam Web may be technically worse in terms of filmmaking craft, but I had more fun with it. Um, I had more fun with Venom, the first Venom, because I think Tom Hardy's doing something really fun there. I had more fun with Venom: The Last Dance because I think, for as weird as that movie is, it takes some pretty interesting turns creatively. I'd probably even say that this Craven movie is worse than Let There Be Carnage. And I'm a Let There Be Carnage hater. I don't really like that movie at all. I think like Carnage looks pretty good, but other than that, I find it pretty bad, just plain bad. But I think Craven the Hunter's worse. I think Craven the Hunter's much worse. I expected this movie to be bad given the quality of these Sony spin-offs, but I did not expect it to be this boring. And for me, that's like the greatest sin of all. Like, at least be bad in a way that's fun or trashy. Um, I don't recommend that anybody spend their money to go see this. I saw this as part of a series I'm attempting here on YouTube where I try to see as many A-list movies. I try to see as many movies using AMC A-list as possible. Um, and I saw this in a Dolby theater. That premium screening didn't really help it much. I saved a whopping $15.99, which I would happily pay out of pocket to get those 2 hours back and to go see something different because there's a lot of other cool stuff coming out. It's award season, and I saw fucking Kraven the Hunter instead of like The Brutalist or Queer or any of these other notable, interesting films from interesting filmmakers. Because I am a comic book nerd and I just eat up all this slop regardless of quality. I guess I always go see it. um on my rating scale on my rating scale of, is a movie A list, is it amazing, is it average, is it abysmal, or is it in need of being a boarded, I would say that Craven the Hunter is firmly in that bottom category. This movie should have been a boarded. Excuse the kind of intense pun there. I'm workshopping it still, but that's truly how I felt about this movie walking out. I don't think it ever should have gotten off the ground in this kind of respect. Like I think you can make a good Craven movie or a good Sony, Spider-Man villain movie or whatever, but this is not for anybody. It doesn't have a creative engine. Um I just really hated this. I'm a big comic book nerd. I can forgive a lot of flaws when it comes to these kinds of movies, but I'm dumbstruck by how terrible this movie ended up being. I really am. And it will remain a black mark on the careers of every single person involved, as it should. It will probably prevent, too, like a lot of these interesting comic book antagonists being adapted on the big screen for quite some time. Like I imagine between just to name an example, I imagine between the Paul Giamatti Rhino and this Rhino, I imagine it'll be a very long time before we see anybody attempt a sort of big screen adaptation of the Rhino again, which, it's not like the Rhino is as significant a Spider-Man villain as Dr. Octopus or Norman Osborn or whatever, but it's kind of a shame to feel as though that character is going to have to be put on ice for so long because of this. Like, I don't know, it's just a shame. I like seeing cool, interesting takes on villains that work, and this was just not it for any of these characters. Um, Please let me know in the comments if you agree with me here. If you think I'm being too harsh, also please let me know. If you liked this movie, more power to you. I was looking forward to this movie. I thought it would be trashy fun from the looks of the trailers, but I was horribly wrong. In my opinion, there was just nothing redeeming here. It was boring, not fun, not brutal. Yeah, even with an R rating, it just didn't feel brutal or like edgy in any cool way. Um, it wasn't sexy, it wasn't funny, it wasn't very stylish. It was just like inept at telling an interesting story in an interesting way, and it sucks. It sucks. Craven is a pretty interesting Spider-Man character in the source material. So, um, I don't know. I want movies to be good. I don't like when they aren't. That's all I really have to say about that. Thank you for watching. I hope you avoided spending your money on Craven. Please don't spend money on tickets to this film. There's much better stuff out there right now, both in theaters and at streaming. I'm sure you could find something better over the holidays to watch. Um, yeah, thanks. I mean, links to my other projects and stuff will be in the description of this video. If you'd like to hear me do, more long form analysis of movies, I've got a podcast with a friend of mine that does that. I've got a series on Patreon where I cover streaming exclusives, things of that nature. So, maybe either of those will be interesting to you. Subscribe to this channel if you're feeling it. I appreciate you hanging out uh, and bearing with me as I did this sort of rambly, kind of just deflated, disappointed ass review of this awful movie. I appreciate your time. Bye.